The scream doesn't come. It never does, not in these corridors. What comes instead is a silence that pulls every portrait tight against the walls, the king's study door yawning open at 2 in the morning, cold air pressing in from the courtyard, a silk scarf fallen and half swallowed by shadow, and the sound, barely there, of glass against wood as a tumbler is set down by a hand that will not shake. The bold move, impossible yesterday, undeniable tonight, sits on the desk like a sealed letter addressed to the nation, to their children, to the past. Camilla sees her name inked, then struck, then written again in a smaller hand. A single pen line becomes a boundary across which there is no return. Her throat tightens. He has chosen. Not a mistress and not a memory, but something stranger, colder, and braver than either. Outside, photographers stir, as if they can smell the tide changing. Inside, the lamplight holds steady, and two people who've survived 1,000 storms find themselves in a room where even breathing sounds like a confession. If you want the truth behind how we arrived at this moment, the private bargain, the public faces, the objects that carried the weight no voice could manage, stay with me. What happened next didn't begin tonight. It began years ago, with a ring too heavy for the finger that wore it, a letter that refused to yellow, and a vow that kept reinventing itself each time it was broken. He returns early without telling anyone. The helicopter slips through a pewter sky, landing softly as the courtyard clocks seem to disapprove. Inside, the king walks alone, fingers brushing the paneling like a ritual. On his desk lies the unopened envelope, its handwriting as familiar as the promise it holds, a vow to a ghost, made long before it was written. Camilla enters quietly, her face honest with time, a color-shifting brooch catching the light. She remains standing. "You decided," she says, sensing the change in the air. He doesn't answer, only opens the window to the night, where a fox moves like a secret. It is not abdication, but a quiet shift, ceding powers to his son, altering the royal calendar, reassigning patronages, and making grief official policy. For Camilla, it is a betrayal without spectacle, a door closing more often, fewer shared appointments, an agenda stripped of we. Between them rest the objects that carry their history, a scratched signet ring, a leaking fountain pen, and a silver box smelling faintly of lavender. He reaches for the pen, its nib scratches the page like something alive, unwilling to be ignored. In the morning, the public learns. It lands not as a shout but as a fog that seeps under doorways and into breakfast conversations. Newsreaders lower their voices. Commentators rehearse compassion like it's a dance step they've finally mastered. The word, transition, appears, and then appears again, until it begins to sound like the name of a ship. Stability, they say. Strategy. A new era anchored in the old. When the announcement spills onto phone screens, a million thumbs revolve around it like bees around a jar that cannot be opened and must be opened. Outside the palace, a woman holds up a sign written in careful, schoolteacher letters, "Thank you for the honesty." Next to her, another sign, angrier, folded at the edges, calls it cowardice. The same wind hurries both papers along. The same gulls watch as if they were there for Diana and will be there still when all of this is a list in a book. Inside, there are meetings that smell the way old paper smells when a library's radiators clank awake. Advisors speak as if each word might cause the floor to tilt. Optics, says one, as if he can hold the country's gaze in his hand and tilt it like a mirror. Legacy, says another, tasting the syllables to see if they can be sweetened. The king listens without nodding. He has already crossed the line. Now there is only the work of teaching others to see it on the floor. Camilla doesn't break in public. She is too well trained, too long in the shadow of being misread. But when she steps into the small sitting room behind the state drawing room, her chest tightens in a way that is not entirely the body's doing. The room is where she keeps a clock that never chimes. She had it silenced years ago. The idea of a tinny voice counting hours was more than she could bear. On the mantel, a vase holds greenhouse roses that do not know the weather outside. She reaches for a single bloom by reflex and stops herself. She will not bruise what can't defend itself. What she remembers, a summer day when the press were kind to her, and how rare that kindness tasted, a night she learned to sleep with lights on because the dark made her body feel like rumor, the first time she watched him walk into a room and felt the air defer to him, and understood that love would always be a third guest at their table, dressed as duty. What she feels now sits between ribs and won't move. It is the knowledge that she has become, again, what the country will argue with itself about. She knows how to wear that role. She no longer knows if she wants to. She finds him in the chapel where the candles are always fresh and the stones feel like folded knees. He stands at the aisle's middle, hands behind his back, as if permission to pray requires paperwork. The flicker turns his face teenage, worry glowing through authority. "This isn't a punishment," he says, not looking at her. The words slide along the tiles and pool somewhere out of reach. He would prefer to talk about architecture. About the ceiling's vaulting ribs, how they make gravity look like a choice. He keeps speaking softly, the way you do when your voice has bulldozed too much in the past. "It's a choice," she answers. "That's the punishment." They do not say the name. It is the name that empties rooms. It is the name that every cushion here has carried and every curtain has learned to hold its breath for. 1,000 people have arranged flowers because of that name. 1,000,000 have cried at kitchen tables because of it. The name is a bell rung in the marrow, and it continues to ring. He has decided to stop pretending he is deaf. In the afternoon, the first poll breaks over lunch. The numbers are polite and then not. He is wise, they say. He is weak, they say. She is gracious, they say. She is grasping, they say. It turns out that when you ask a country who it is, it answers by telling you who you are instead. The family watch without watching. Plates are scraped more quickly. The dogs, always a better barometer than pundits, cling to ankles in a way that suggests storms. George sees the news on his phone and feels that tug in the gut that comes when a story you thought was yours is called back to the museum. Charlotte, faster, asks no questions, her eyes catalogue furniture, exits, where to stand when grown-ups' voices climb. The children have grown up in the bright aquarium of watchfulness, they know how not to make ripples. They do the other thing instead, they make rhythm. The next day, they walk a rope of public engagements with smiles that could be sewn onto flags. Somewhere between a library opening and an art therapy workshop, a little boy hands Charlotte a paper crown made of sugar paper and staples. She puts it on immediately, without irony. Cameras purr. The boy glows. The crown droops by late afternoon and leaves a faint green line on her forehead like a secret joke. That evening, the country's anger stops trying to be articulate. It becomes mood. Pubs argue. Group chats combust in good faith and then in bad. Outside a terraced house in Leeds, a woman waters hydrangeas and tells her neighbour that she never trusted the second wife. In a flat in Glasgow, a man goes quiet halfway through a sentence and admits he feels sorry for them all. On a bus in Bristol, an old lady lifts a rosary and mutters something that might be a prayer or might be a verdict. Back at the palace, Camilla sits at a small bureau that belonged to someone whose portraits now hang anonymously in the corridor and takes out a note card with her crest. She writes and then stops, writes and then stops. What can she say? That she's tired of being a story made of sharp edges. That she respects the man even when she cannot endorse his choices. That she understands the country's nostalgia like a flu she suffers each winter. She imagines reading the words aloud and her mouth turns stranger from her face, detached by shame or dignity, she can't tell which. Instead, she chooses objects. She sets the signet ring down upon the note card and turns it once to catch the room's light. She takes the silver box and opens it, the lavender is old but faithful. She inserts the note card beneath the ribbon inside and closes the lid. She will give it to him when the house is asleep and call it a gesture. She will not call it a goodbye. Public life doesn't pause for private alignment. The next morning there's a hospital to visit, then a charity breakfast where forks sound like the tapping of tiny hammers. The king moves through faces wearing his, and the thing he has done clicks into place with each handshake. This is the shape he chose, and it fits. He feels light for the first time in months. Not happy. Happiness is a hat that keeps falling off, but less wrong. When he speaks, his voice has the clarity of an instrument finely tuned. He does not notice that the cameras linger, seeking something that isn't there. But cameras always find something. At the hospital, a nurse pins a small white carnation onto his lapel, and the flower becomes the day's symbol, a little cloud of forgiveness above a heart. The internet assigns meaning before the petals know they've left the stem. Within hours the carnation's image is everywhere, cropped and filtered, an accidental brand of contrition. Somewhere in a cheap office in Shoreditch, a social media manager smiles the smile of someone whose metrics have been kind. The pivot arrives in a form he didn't predict, a letter read on radio, written by a woman who had once made bouquets for the young princess who could not outrun a tunnel. Grief, the woman writes, is not a plan. But it can be a garden. The host reads it twice, because the first time the studio goes too quiet and some producer waves and mouths keep speaking. The letter becomes a turning wheel. People start to say, "I see it," when they talk about what he's done. People start to say, "I see her," when they talk about why. He does not sleep that night, but for once the not sleep isn't punishment. It is vigilance's twin, the kind that watches over something fragile and chosen instead of something broken and denied. Camilla waits, as she has learned. She waits until the house decides to breathe again, until footsteps are memory and alarms reset themselves to that generous low hum. She goes to the study holding the silver box. She has put on a necklace she saves for times she wants to be reminded that she has survived other people's versions of her. The box is warm in her hands by the time she lifts the latch. He is at the desk, shoulders at angles that would make a painter sigh. Papers stacked squarely. A pen asleep in its groove. He looks up the way someone looks up when they know they have already disappointed you and hope they can do it with civility. She places the box on the desk. The silver catches both faces for a moment and returns them to each other as blurred reflections, two people filtered by metal. "I'm going to say something once," she murmurs, and even the desk seems to straighten. He waits. "When you made me a choice," she says, "I learned to be chosen. When you made the country your confession, I learned to be your consequence. Tonight I'm making myself a promise. It isn't against you. It's simply away from you." Her hand, not shaking, rests on the box. "I will do my duty. But I will stop being the debate you keep having with yourself." It is the most honest thing she has said this year. Perhaps this decade. He reaches for the box and hesitates. That old cowardice nips at him like a cold dog under a table. He wants to ask her to stay with him in the place where hope and guilt hold hands. He wants to be forgiven for trying to be both a country and a man. He opens the box instead. The note card is neat. The ring glints. The lavender lifts like a memory knocking on a door. The note says only, with surgical precision, "This is yours to carry. Not mine, not anymore." He looks at the ring and knows it is not a ring. It is the room they have both been living in without furniture. It is the name they both refuse to say, ringing and ringing. In the days that follow, the palace becomes a theater where nobody is sure which scene they are in. The public sees what they can, a toned-down calendar, a softer gaze, the wife appearing in fewer photographs and yet in those few looking more absolutely herself than she has in years. She wears the brooch less. She keeps the silenced clock. When she smiles, it is not to win anyone back. It is to measure the distance she has traveled in a single night. He finds, unexpectedly, an ally in the choir master, a man with hands like coat hangers and a habit of speaking in metaphors that would be ridiculous if they didn't always land exactly where they were aimed. "You can't sing a major key in a minor heart," the choir master says, tapping his tuning fork on the pew as if the wood held answers. "But you can choose a harmony that tells the truth." The king closes his eyes at that, not in prayer but in relief, the relief of being given a sentence he can carry in his pocket and hold when speeches start to sound like someone else's clothing. The public fallout reaches its bright peak and then begins to cool. That is how sunlight works. That is how fury does. The headlines discover other food. The commentary class runs its fingers along other seams looking for fray. But something remains. It sits under the skin of the nation like a small coin everyone forgot they were given as children. It can be rubbed for luck. It can be swallowed when you need to remember that moving forward is an art. There are, inevitably, confrontations that will never be filmed. In one, William arrives without knocking. He is the only one who still does that, and sets a folder on the desk. Inside are plans for a tour, a program shaped like a handshake offered to the Commonwealth and to the future. "We'll carry it," he says simply. His eyes hold the kind of grief he has learned to keep domesticated. "But you need to stop apologizing in code." The king smiles, not from amusement but from the recognition that comes when someone has used your private language correctly. In another, Camilla and Catherine share a cup of tea that is, technically, perfectly brewed. They say little. The room does the talking, it murmurs compromise and sings the lullaby of survival. When they part, there is no hug and no frost. There is only the quiet between two women who have calibrated their lives to the weather systems of men the world refuses to let be only men. By summer's end, the move is no longer new. It has become, as all revolutions do, routine. The roses in the garden go on being ridiculous and generous. The fox keeps its secret schedule. The silenced clock still refuses to tell anyone what time it is. Late one night, with the palace creaking like a ship at sea, he walked the long corridor under the gaze of painted ancestors, stopping at a window to see his reflection doubled, king and man, both tired, both honest enough to share the same skin. In his study, he lifted the silver box, feeling its precise weight, knowing Camilla was awake 2 rooms away, perhaps wearing the necklace he would never ask about. On the table, a wilted carnation had lifted its head in the cool air, a small reminder that some things, though unfixable, still endure. The country had already moved into its habitual forgiveness, never naming it. Life went on, but sometimes, in kitchens or at bus stops, someone would say, "Well, he did it," and another would answer, "He did," in that uniquely British mix of complaint and absolution. If there was a climax, it was quiet, a wife no longer a battleground, a husband learning to measure tremors instead of causing earthquakes, children quietly filing lessons away. Weeks later, on a rain-scented Sunday, Camilla slipped into the chapel alone, lit a candle, and understood that objects only hurt when we force them to keep our stories. Back in her room, she wrote 3 private sentences. "I am not an argument. I can be loyal without being the shield. I will not translate myself into someone else's pardon." That night, he traced the box's seam, realizing how often he had mistaken performance for penitence. Carrying it to the window, he opened it to the night. The lavender breathed out as if freed. He spoke no names. The garden listened anyway. In the silence that followed, the carnation leaned toward the last of the light. He closed the window, left the box open, turned off the lamp. No thunder, just breath. 2 people sleeping in separate rooms, not reconciled but not at war. A nation quietly exhaling. A ring resting, no longer bearing anyone's promises. The portrait stayed silent. Tomorrow's papers would invent new verbs. Tonight the house, embraced at last, held the truth, not absolution, not triumph, but a weight shifted to where it could be carried without breaking anything else. Somewhere, a woman who was once a princess had become neither threat nor saint, just a weather system that had finally passed, leaving the air smelling of rain and something kind. If you've been captivated by this glimpse inside the palace walls, stay with us. There's far more to uncover. The secrets, the silences, and the choices that will shape the monarchy's future are only beginning to surface. Keep watching, because the next chapter will change everything you thought you knew.